The envelope wasn't addressed to anyone. No name, no stamp. Just my street address, written in handwriting I recognized instantly. It had been sitting in my mailbox for 3 days before I finally opened it. Part of me knew what I'd find inside. The other part was still hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. 6 photographs. That's all it took to unravel everything I thought I knew about my time in Helmand Province. Everything I thought I knew about the man who saved my life more times than I could count. Everything I thought I knew about loyalty and trust and who the real enemy was. His name was Rashid, and this is the story of how I discovered the truth. I first met Rashid in August 2011, 2 weeks into my deployment. I was a staff sergeant with the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, stationed at Forward Operating Base Delhi in Garmsir District. 26 years old, 2nd deployment, convinced I knew how everything worked over there. I didn't know anything. Our unit was tasked with training Afghan National Army soldiers and conducting joint patrols through the villages along the Helmand River. The problem was communication. Our previous interpreter had rotated out, and we'd been limping along with phrase books and hand gestures that got us nowhere. Then Rashid showed up. He was shorter than me, maybe 5'7", with a thick black beard and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Mid-30s, I guessed, though it was hard to tell. The desert aged people differently. He wore Western clothes, jeans and a faded polo shirt, and spoke English with a British accent that seemed out of place against the backdrop of mud brick compounds and poppy fields. "Staff Sergeant Torres?" He extended his hand. "I'm Washid Ahmadi. I'll be your interpreter." His handshake was firm, confident, nothing like the nervous, deferential manner of some of the local contractors we'd worked with. "You speak English pretty well," I said. "I studied in London for 2 years, linguistics." He smiled, and there was something warm in it. Before everything fell apart here. Over the next few days, I learned Rashid's story, or at least the version he told me. He'd grown up in Kabul, from a middle-class family. His father had been a civil servant under the communist government. When the Taliban took over, the family had scattered. An uncle in London had sponsored Rashid's education. He'd planned to stay in England, build a life there. But his sister had still been in Afghanistan, married to a farmer in Helmand Province. When she'd gotten sick, cancer, he said, he'd come back to take care of her children. That was 3 years ago. She'd passed 6 months later. He'd stayed. "Why not go back to London?" I asked one evening as we cleaned our weapons outside the wire. He looked out toward the mountains, dark shapes against the purple twilight. "Her children are here, her husband. This is their home. Someone has to help them understand a world that keeps changing around them." It sounded noble. Looking back now, I wonder how much of it was true. The first time Rashid saved my life was in late September. We were on patrol through a village called Khosrow, 6 Marines and a dozen ANA soldiers moving house to house looking for weapons caches. Intelligence said the Taliban were using civilian compounds for storage. What intelligence didn't say was which compounds or how many fighters might be waiting. We'd just finished clearing a mud brick home, nothing but farming tools and bags of wheat, when Rashid grabbed my arm. His fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. "Listen," he whispered. I heard it then. Voices from the compound next door. Men arguing in Pashto, their words rapid and urgent. Our ANA counterparts hadn't noticed. We're already moving to stack up at the next entrance. "Tell them to stop," I said quietly. Rashid called out in Pashto. The ANA soldiers froze. One of them, a sergeant named Habib, looked back at us with confusion. "What are they saying?" I asked Rashid, my hand tightening on my rifle. "They're arguing whether to engage or let us pass. One of them wants to wait until we're inside. The others think there are too many of us." My radio operator, Corporal Chen, was already calling it in, but we're a half click from the nearest support, and the argument next door was getting louder. "They're going to attack," Rashid said, his voice steady, matter of fact. "The young one just said we've already seen too much. They can't let us leave." I made the call. We pulled back, established a perimeter, waited for the compound to be cleared by a team with proper support. When they went in 20 minutes later, they found 3 Taliban fighters with AK-47s and a cache of pressure plate IEDs that would have torn through our patrol like paper. Afterwards, back at the FOB, I found Rashid sitting alone outside the chow hall smoking a cigarette. "That was good work today," I said. He took a drag, exhaled slowly. "I just listened." "You did more than listen. You understood what they were planning. That's different." He looked at me then, and something flickered across his face. I couldn't read it. "I grew up with men like that, Staff Sergeant. I know how they think, how they talk, the small signals that tell you when someone has decided to do violence. Well, I'm glad you're on our side." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, of course." Before I tell you what happened next, if you're hooked on this story, hit that like button and subscribe. There are dozens more voices like mine here. And drop a comment with your country. I'm curious where all of you are listening from. Over the next 3 months, Rashid became more than just our interpreter. He became our guide, our cultural advisor, our early warning system. He knew which village elders could be trusted and which were playing both sides. He knew which roads were safe and which ones got hit by IEDs every other week. He knew how to read the way women clutched their children when we approached, how to interpret the absence of young men in a village that should have been full of them. The second time he saved my life was in December, during a night raid on a compound suspected of harboring a Taliban commander. We'd hit the building hard, flashbangs and everything, only to find it empty except for an old man and 3 terrified children. "Where is everyone?" Lieutenant Brennan demanded through Rashid. The old man just shook his head, his hands trembling. Rashid spoke to him in Pashto, his voice gentle. The conversation went on for several minutes while we cleared the rest of the compound. Nothing, no weapons, no intelligence, no sign of recent occupation beyond the grandfather and the kids. "He says the family left 2 days ago," Rashid finally told us. "They went to Lashkar Gah for a wedding." "Bullshit," Lieutenant Brennan said. "Intel says the commander was here yesterday." "Your intel is wrong." Rashid's voice was firm. "This man is telling the truth. His daughter-in-law is from Lashkar Gah. The wedding is her cousin. He stayed behind because he's too old to travel." Brennan wanted to search the compound again, tear it apart looking for hidden rooms. I was about to agree when Rashid pulled me aside. "Staff Sergeant, we need to leave, now." "Why?" "Because someone set you up. Someone wanted you to be here tonight, to be here right now. And that means—" The first mortar round hit the compound wall 50 meters from where we stood. The second one landed in the courtyard we'd just crossed. We scrambled for cover as 4 more rounds walked across the compound. Brennan was screaming into the radio for fire support, while Chen tried to triangulate where the mortars were coming from. The old man and the children were huddled in the corner of the room we'd cleared, the kids crying, the grandfather trying to shield them with his body. "How did you know?" I shouted to Rashid over the explosions. The old man kept looking at the door. He was nervous, but not because of us. He was nervous because he knew what was coming. Someone told his family to leave. Someone told them to leave him here as bait. We got out. Lost 1 ANA soldier to shrapnel, but the rest of us made it back to the vehicles and extracted before the Taliban ground forces could close in. The old man and the children came with us. We couldn't leave them there. Later, intelligence confirmed it. The Taliban commander we'd been hunting had set the whole thing up. He'd leaked his location through a source we knew we'd trust, then waited for us to take the bait. If we'd stayed 5 more minutes searching that compound, the mortar barrage would have been followed by a ground assault that we weren't positioned to repel. "You've got good instincts," I told Rashid that night. "I've got good memories," he corrected. "The Taliban used that tactic against the Soviets. My uncle told me about it. They would sacrifice 1 compound, 1 family to draw in a patrol. Then they'd kill everyone." "Your uncle was a fighter?" "My uncle was a survivor. There's a difference." Christmas came and went. New Year's. We rang in 2012 with a firefight in a village whose name I can't remember anymore. 3 Taliban fighters pinned down in a compound. Us trying to flush them out without leveling the whole building. Rashid talked them into surrendering by convincing them we'd let them see their families one more time. We didn't, of course. They went to detention in Kandahar.
but it ended without any civilian casualties, and that was rare enough to feel like a victory. The third time Rashid saved my life was in February. We were running a vehicle checkpoint on Route 611, stopping traffic to search for weapons and bomb-making materials. It was boring work, the kind that made you sloppy. Wave through the motorcycles, check the trunks of the sedans, make small talk with the drivers while Rashid translated. A blue pickup truck approached with 4 men in the cab, young guys, early 20s, all with the same nervous energy that could mean anything or nothing. In Afghanistan, everyone was nervous around Americans.
Rashid spoke to the driver through the window. Standard questions. Where are you going? Where are you coming from? What's in the back? The driver's answers were normal. They were heading to Lashkar-Gah for work, coming from their village 10 kilometers north. Nothing in the back but tools. Pull over there, I told them, pointing to the search area. The driver nodded, started to put the truck in gear. That's when Rashid leaned in and asked one more question. I didn't catch it, didn't understand the Pashto, but I saw the driver's reaction. His eyes widened, just for a second, just enough. Stop the vehicle, Rashid said. Don't let them drive away. The truck was already moving. I stepped in front of it and rifle up. Stop! Stop the vehicle! The driver looked at his passengers. I saw one of them reach for something. Down! Rashid tackled me sideways as the truck suddenly accelerated. It crashed through our flimsy barrier and sped down the road, 50 meters, 100 meters. Then it exploded. The blast was big enough that we felt the heat from where we lay in the dirt, big enough that the shockwave rattled my teeth. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but a crater and burning debris. What the hell did you ask him? I said when I could breathe again. Rashid was staring at the crater, his face pale. I asked him if his brother still lived in their village. He told me earlier he was going to see his brother in Lashkar-Gah, but then he said they were going for work. Stories like that don't change unless you're lying. They were suicide bombers. They were going to wait until more vehicles came through. Bigger explosion, more casualties. Rashid stood up, brushing the dust from his clothes. His hands were shaking. They were very young. Too young. I reported it up the chain. Intelligence debriefed us. They called it good work, added it to our patrol report, moved on. Another day in Helmand province. But I kept thinking about what Rashid had said. Too young. Like he felt sorry for them. Now here's where everything changed. But real quick, if you're invested in how this ends, I genuinely appreciate a subscription. More soldier stories drop daily. Comment your country below. Always amazes me how far these reach. The fourth time happened in April. We were conducting a joint operation with British forces, clearing a series of compounds in the green zone along the Helmand River. Heavy vegetation, irrigation canals, perfect ambush terrain. The kind of place where you felt eyes on you from every direction. Rashid was jumpy that day. I noticed it during the briefing, the way he kept checking his phone, looking distracted. When I asked if something was wrong, he said his niece was sick, the daughter of his dead sister. She had a fever. You want to sit this one out? I asked. No, she'll be fine. Her father is with her. But he wasn't fine. During the patrol, he kept lagging behind, stopping to retie his boots or adjust his radio, little delays that added up. We were 2 hours into the operation when we hit the canal, 40 feet wide, murky brown water, a rickety wooden bridge that looked like it would collapse under the weight of a goat. The British were on the other side, waving us across. We should find another crossing, Rashid said. Why? Bridge looks solid enough. Just a feeling. Lieutenant Brennan overheard. We don't have time for feelings, Rashid. We've got a schedule. Then at least let me go first. Rashid stepped onto the bridge before anyone could stop him. He made it halfway across before he stopped, knelt down, examined the planks. IED, he called back. Pressure plate, right in the middle of the bridge. EOD came up, confirmed it. 5 pounds of homemade explosive packed into a plastic jug, pressure plate trigger, hidden under a plank that had been carefully replaced. It would have gone off the moment our first vehicle tried to cross, would have collapsed the bridge and dropped whoever was on it into the canal, weighted down with 60 pounds of gear. How did you know? I asked after EOD cleared it. The wood was too clean. Someone had recently worked on the bridge, and there was no dust on the middle planks. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Small details. You've got a good eye. I've seen a lot of bridges.
Times 5 and 6 came within a month of each other, both so routine they almost didn't register. Rashid noticing a fresh patch of dirt on a road we traveled every day, IED buried that morning. Rashid steering us away from a building where he said the elder seemed too cooperative. Turned out the Taliban had taken the man's son hostage and told him to lead us into an ambush. 6 times Rashid Ahmadi saved my life or the lives of my Marines. I wrote him up for a commendation, recommended him for one of the special immigrant visas that were supposed to help Afghans who'd risked everything to help us. He'd earned it 10 times over. "Thank you, Sergeant McKinney," he said when I told him, "but I don't think I'll use it." "Why not? You've got family in London. You could go back, start over somewhere safe." "My niece and nephew are here. My brother-in-law. They need me. The Taliban will figure out you've been helping us eventually. When they do, I know the risks." His voice was gentle but firm. "This is my home. I don't run." I respected that. Hell, I admired it. Here was a man who could have gotten out, who had every reason to leave, choosing to stay because of loyalty to family, because of principle.
My deployment ended in August 2012. 1 year in Helmand Province. Came home to Camp Lejeune, to my wife Maria and my 2-year-old daughter Sophia, to a life that felt strange and muted after the sharpness of everything over there. I stayed in touch with Rashid through email. Not often, maybe once every few months, just checking in, making sure he was okay. He always said he was fine. The visa application was moving through the system. His niece and nephew were growing up. Life continued. In 2014, I got out of the Marines, took a job as a police officer in Jacksonville, tried to build something normal. Maria and I had a son. Sophia started kindergarten. We bought a house with a mortgage that terrified me more than any firefight ever had. But I still thought about Afghanistan, about the guys I'd served with, about the interpreters and the local nationals who'd helped us and what had happened to them after we left. The Taliban were gaining ground again. We all knew it. We all watched the news and felt that sick weight in our stomachs. In 2017, I got an email from Rashid. His visa had finally been approved. He was bringing his niece and nephew, teenagers now, to America. They were being resettled in Virginia. "Maybe one day we can have coffee," he wrote. "I would like that very much, to see you without the war between us." I wrote back immediately, said I'd drive up to Virginia any time, said he was a hero and I'd never forget what he'd done for me and my Marines. He never responded. I need to tell you what happened next, but first, if this story's got you, show some love with a like and subscribe. I read every comment. Especially love seeing where you're all from around the world. I tried a few more times over the next year, sent emails asking if he'd made it to the States okay, asked if he needed help with anything. Just silence. I told myself he was busy. New country, new life, teenagers to raise. He didn't owe me his time, but it nagged at me. In July 2019, I got a phone call from a guy who said he was with DHS, Homeland Security. He asked if I knew Rashid Ahmadi. Yeah, he was my interpreter in Afghanistan. Why? We're conducting routine follow-up interviews with Afghan refugees, part of the vetting process. Would you be willing to answer some questions about your time working with him? I said yes. They sent an agent to my house 3 days later, a woman in her 40s with dark hair and a serious expression that never changed. She recorded everything. She asked me about Rashid's work, about how we'd communicated, about whether I'd ever noticed anything suspicious, whether he'd ever asked questions that seemed out of scope, whether he'd ever had access to operational information. Why are you asking me this? I said. Standard vetting, like I said. No, this isn't standard. What's going on? She closed her notebook. I can't discuss an ongoing investigation, but I can tell you that we take any potential security concerns very seriously. If you think of anything at all that seemed off during your time with Mr. Ahmadi, I'd encourage you to call me. She left her card. I stared at it for an hour after she left. What the hell had Rashid done? I spent the next week obsessing over it.
going through old deployment photos, reading through my journal entries from Afghanistan, trying to remember anything that might have been a red flag. There was nothing. Rashid had been perfect, professional, brave, dedicated. 6 times he'd saved my life. 6 times he'd proven his loyalty. Unless he had to. Unless saving our lives had been part of maintaining his cover. Unless everything I thought I knew about him had been a carefully constructed lie. I pushed the thought away. It was paranoid, insulting. Rashid had earned my trust 100 times over. But the thought wouldn't leave. In September 2019, I called the DHS agent back, asked if there was any update on the investigation. "I can't discuss it," she said. "Can you at least tell me if Rashid is okay? If his niece and nephew are okay?" A long pause. "They're safe." "But he's not?" Another pause. "I really can't discuss this, Mr. Torres." "Staff Sergeant Torres, and yes, you can. I was his reference. I vouched for him. I wrote the recommendation that helped him get his visa. If he's done something, if he's in trouble, I have a right to know." "Did you ever wonder how he knew so much? How he seemed to always be in the right place at the right time? How he could predict what the Taliban would do before they did it?" My throat grew dry. "He grew up there. He understood the culture." "He understood a lot more than culture, Staff Sergeant, and I think you've started to figure that out. When you do, call me back." She hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Maria, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. 6 times Rashid saved my life. 6 times he'd known things he shouldn't have known. How did he hear those Taliban fighters arguing in the compound? We were 30 feet away, outside, with wind and ambient noise. But he picked up their conversation clearly enough to know their entire plan.
How had he known the old man in the compound was lying? Not just suspected, known. Known so confidently that he'd convinced me to evacuate immediately, seconds before the mortar attack. How had he spotted that inconsistency in the suicide bomber's story? I'd been standing right there, watching the driver's face, and I hadn't seen anything wrong until Rashid pointed it out. How had he known about the IED on the bridge when none of us had seen anything suspicious? Option 1, he was incredibly skilled, incredibly lucky, and incredibly observant. Option 2, he'd known in advance. Someone had told him where the threats would be. Someone on the other side. I got out of bed at 3 in the morning and went to my garage. I kept all my deployment stuff in boxes on a high shelf. Photos, letters, awards, the journal I'd maintained. Maria didn't like having it in the house, said it made me dwell. I pulled down the box from 2011, 2012 and started going through it. There were maybe 50 photos, the standard deployment stuff. Guys standing in front of vehicles, group shots at the FOB, a few of us on patrol. I found 3 that had Rashid in them. In 2, he was in the background, barely visible. In the 3rd, he was standing with me and Corporal Chin outside FOB Delhi, all 3 of us squinting against the sun. He looked so normal, so trustworthy. I kept digging, found my journal entries. Most of them were brief, just notes about missions and weather and what packages had arrived from home. But there were a few longer entries about Rashid, about how grateful I was to have a good interpreter, about how he'd saved us in Khosrow village, about the bridge IED. I read them all, looking for something I'd missed, some detail that would explain everything. That's when I found the letter. It was tucked into the back of my journal, folded into a small square. I'd forgotten about it. Rashid had given it to me on my last day in country, August 2012. "Read this when you get home, when you're safe," he'd said. I'd read it once, briefly, on the flight back to the States. It had been a standard goodbye letter, thanking me for my service, wishing me well, saying he'd never forget what we'd been through together. I read it again now, looking for hidden meanings. There was one sentence that caught my attention. "I hope you understand that every choice I made to protect the innocent." At the time, I'd thought he meant his choices to help us, his choice to risk his life as an interpreter. But what if he'd meant something else? The envelope arrived 3 days later. No return address.
Just my name and street address in handwriting I recognized. Rashid's handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. 6 photographs fell out. All of them were of me. One from Khosrow village, standing outside the compound where Rashid had first warned us about the Taliban fighters. One from the checkpoint where the suicide bomber had nearly gotten through. One from the canal with the IED-rigged bridge. In every photo, there were other people in the background. Local nationals, civilians, people whose faces I didn't recognize. Except in one photo, taken at the checkpoint, I did recognize someone. A young man, maybe 23 or 24, standing 50 feet away, watching us search vehicles. He had the same features as one of the men who'd been in the suicide truck. Same face, same build. But this photo had been taken 3 weeks before the checkpoint incident. He'd been scouting us, and Rashid had been there. There was a handwritten note with the photos, brief, almost cryptic. You asked me once why I stayed. I stayed because of Amira. They took her when she was 9 years old. They said if I helped the Americans, I would never see her. If I refused to help the Americans, they would take my nephew too. So I did both. I helped you, and I helped them. Every piece of information I gave them I made sure would save lives, not end them. The fighters in Khosrow, I told them you were coming, yes, but I also told them that you had too many men, that they should leave. They refused. The old man's compound? I told them about the raid, yes, but I told the family to evacuate. I told them to leave only the grandfather because I knew you wouldn't harm an old man. The bridge? I told them where you would cross, yes, but I made sure the IED was visible, placed where I would find it. Every time I walked a line between 2 worlds. Every time I tried to minimize the damage, to keep you alive, to keep Amira alive. When my visa was approved, I thought it was over. I thought I could escape with my nephew and niece and start fresh in America. But Amira, they wouldn't release her. And when I got to Virginia, they contacted me, said I had one more job, said if I did it, they would finally let her go. I couldn't do it. The job they wanted, it would have gotten people taken. Americans, Afghans, good people who didn't deserve to suffer for this war. So I refused. And they took what video they had of me, meetings, conversations, dead drops, and they sent it to your government. They made sure I would be arrested, made sure I would be labeled a traitor. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for deceiving you. I'm sorry for putting you in danger, even as I tried to keep you safe. I'm sorry for being weak. By the time you read this, I'll be in federal custody. The photos are for you, so you can understand, so you can know that even in the worst situations, people try to do what they think is right. Tell your daughter about Amira. Tell her that somewhere in Afghanistan there's a girl who deserves a life, who deserves more than what I could give her.
I sat in my garage, holding those photos until Maria came looking for me. When she asked what was wrong, I couldn't speak. I just handed her the letter. She read it twice. Then she held me while I cried for the first time since coming home from deployment. I called the DHS agent the next morning, told her I'd received a letter from Rashid, told her I wanted to understand what had happened. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Jacksonville, brought a file folder this time. We've known about Mr. Ahmadi's activities since 2016, she said. NSA intercepted communications between Taliban operatives that referenced an asset working with coalition forces. It took us 2 years to identify him. By then, he was already in the States. The things he did, the information he passed, did it get anyone hurt? She hesitated. We've been analyzing everything we can recover. His pattern was unusual. In most cases of this kind, the asset provides information that directly leads to coalition casualties, ambushes, IED locations, patrol routes. But with Ahmadi, every piece of intelligence he passed seemed designed to either fail or to create situations where he could warn you away at the last minute. So he was protecting us. Or he was protecting himself, maintaining his cover while minimizing the risk of being discovered. She opened the folder, showed me surveillance photos. Rashid meeting with men in Virginia, outside a mosque, in parking lots. After he arrived in the States, he was contacted by Taliban-affiliated individuals who'd also made it through the refugee process. They wanted him to identify potential targets, government facilities, military families, soft targets that could be hit to send a message. He refused. He refused, and he brought the recordings of those conversations to us, voluntarily. He turned himself in and provided enough information to arrest 3 men who were planning an attack on a recruitment center in Arlington. I stared at the photos, at Rashid's face, lined with stress, captured by long-range surveillance cameras. So what happens to him now? He's cooperating fully. He's provided information about Taliban networks, funding sources, operatives who've infiltrated the refugee process. He's valuable. But he's going to prison? Yes, she closed the folder. What he did in Afghanistan, even if his motives were complicated, even if he was trying to minimize harm, it was still material support to a terrorist organization. People make choices, Staff Sergeant. Sometimes there are no good ones, just less bad ones. What about his daughter, Amira? Is she real? The agent's expression softened. She's real. We've confirmed her existence through multiple sources. She's 16 now, living with a Taliban commander's family in Kandahar province. We've made inquiries through back channels, but what? But extracting one girl from that situation would require resources and political capital that our government isn't willing to spend. Not for the daughter of someone who worked against us. I'm sorry. I've spent the last few years trying to understand what happened, trying to figure out if Rashid was a hero or a traitor, trying to decide if the man who saved my life 6 times was the same man who endangered it in the first place. The truth is, I don't know. Maybe he was both. Maybe in a place like Afghanistan, in a war like that, those categories don't mean what we want them to mean. The DHS agent told me Rashid pleaded guilty to conspiracy and material support charges. He got 8 years in federal prison, eligible for parole in 5. His niece and nephew are still in Virginia, living with a refugee family that took them in. I've thought about reaching out, but I don't know what I'd say. I'm sorry. Your uncle was trying to survive an impossible situation. He saved my life, and I can't save his daughter? None of it seems adequate. I still have the photos he sent me. I keep them in my garage, in that box of deployment memories I don't look at very often. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I go out there and study them, looking for answers in faces I don't recognize, in moments I barely remember. Maria asked me once if I was angry at him, at Rashid, for the deception, for the betrayal. I told her I didn't know, that anger seemed too simple for something this complicated. He had a daughter. I have a daughter. If someone took Sophia and told me the only way to keep her alive was to do terrible things, I don't know what I'd do. You'd do what you had to, Maria said, just like he did. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's all of us do in the end. We make the best choices we can with the information we have, trying to protect the people we love, trying to minimize the harm. And sometimes those choices destroy us anyway.
Last year I got one more letter from Rashid. This one came through official channels, forwarded by his attorney. It was short. Amira is gone. Taliban released her when I confessed. She made it to Pakistan with help from your government. She'll be in America soon, starting college, engineering. She's brilliant. Thank you for keeping me alive long enough to see this happen. R. I read it 5 times. Then I put it in the box with the photos and the deployment journal and all the other pieces of a past I don't know how to reconcile. I saved Rashid's life by giving him work as an interpreter. He saved my life by warning me away from dangers he'd helped create. He saved his daughter's life by sacrificing his own freedom. And in the end, maybe that's the only victory any of us get. The people we love survive, even if we don't. I met Amira 6 months ago. She reached out through email, got my address from somewhere, I never asked where. Said she was studying mechanical engineering at Virginia Tech. Said her father had told her about me, about the Marines he'd worked with. about the impossible situation he'd been in. "I don't expect you to forgive him," she wrote. "I'm not sure I have, but I wanted you to know that he talked about you often, about all of you. He said you were good men in a bad situation. He said if things had been different, you might have been friends." We met for coffee in Richmond. She was tall, taller than Rashid, with his same dark eyes and that same way of observing everything at once. 20 years old, but carrying herself with the weight of someone much older, someone who'd survived things I couldn't imagine. "My father told me he saved your life 6 times, she said. "Is that true?" "Yes." "He never told me what it cost him to walk that line, to try to keep everyone alive." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "The Taliban commander who kept me, he told me my father was a coward, that he worked for the Americans because he was weak, because he had no honor." "Your father had more honor than anyone I knew over there." "Did he?" Her eyes met mine. "He lied to you every day. He put you in danger. He worked for people who wanted you gone. How is that honor?" I didn't have a good answer. Still don't. "He did what he thought would keep you alive," I finally said. "And it worked. You're here. You're safe. You're going to be an engineer. That's what he wanted." "What he wanted was to not have to choose." Her voice cracked. "He wanted to protect everyone. His country, his family, the Americans who gave him hope that things could be different. And instead, he got torn apart trying to hold all of it together." We talked for 2 hours that day. She told me about her childhood, about being taken by the Taliban when she was 9, about the years she'd spent in that compound not knowing if her father was alive or dead, about the day they'd released her, thrown her in the back of a truck, and driven her to the Pakistani border with nothing but the clothes she was wearing. They told me my father had confessed, that he'd turned himself in to the Americans. They said he'd chosen his shame over me, but I knew better. He'd chosen my freedom, even if it cost him everything. "Do you see him in prison?" "Once a month. He doesn't like me to come. Says I should focus on my future, not waste time visiting a federal inmate. But he's my father. He's all I have left." She pulled out her phone, showed me a recent photo. Rashid in prison khakis, looking older and thinner, but smiling, really smiling. The kind of smile I'd never seen on him in Afghanistan. He says he sleeps better now. No more secrets. No more walking between two worlds, just consequences. And he says consequences are easier to bear than lies. I think about that conversation a lot. About Rashid sleeping better in a federal prison cell than he ever did as a free man. About the weight of secrets and the strange relief that comes when you finally stop carrying them. I think about the 6 times he saved my life, and I think about all the times I'll never know about, the dangers he steered us away from, the intelligence he fed to the Taliban that was just wrong enough to keep us safe, the compromises he made in the dark that I'll never understand. Was he a traitor? By every legal definition, yes. He provided material support to an enemy force. He passed operational information to people who wanted Americans gone. He committed crimes that earned him 8 years in federal prison. Was he a hero? Ask the Marines who made it home from that deployment. Ask his daughter who's alive because he had the courage to finally stop. Ask yourself what you would have done in his place, with a 9-year-old daughter in Taliban hands and no good options left. I don't have clean answers anymore. I used to think the world divided neatly into good guys and bad guys, allies and enemies, right and wrong. Afghanistan taught me different. Rashid taught me different. Some people exist in the spaces between those categories. They do terrible things for understandable reasons. They betray you while trying to save you. They lie to you while telling you the only truth that matters. Survival is complicated, and everyone's trying to protect someone.
Sophia is 12 now. She asked me last month about my time in Afghanistan. It was the first time she'd really shown interest. Too young before, too focused on her own world. But she's reading about the war in school, about the withdrawal, about what we left behind. "Did you ever feel bad about being there?" she asked. "Like maybe we shouldn't have gone?" I thought about Rashid, about Amira, about all the people caught between empires and ideologies and choices they didn't make. "I felt a lot of things," I told her. "Still do. But I met some good people over there. People who were trying their best in impossible situations. That's worth something, even when everything else falls apart." "Did any of them make it out?" "Some did. There's a girl not much older than you who made it to America. She's studying engineering at Virginia Tech. Her father helped keep me alive long enough to come home and meet your baby brother." "That's good." Sophia went back to her homework, satisfied with the answer. I didn't tell her the rest. Didn't tell her that the girl's father is in prison, or that the price of her freedom was his own. Didn't tell her about the moral ambiguities that keep me awake some nights, or the questions I still don't know how to answer. She's 12. She's got time to learn that the world is more complicated than good guys and bad guys, that sometimes the person who saves your life is the same person who endangered it, that loyalty and betrayal can exist in the same heart, in the same moment, in the same impossible choice. Rashid comes up for parole next year. His attorney sent me a letter asking if I'd be willing to write a statement for his parole hearing, a character reference, an acknowledgement of his service to coalition forces, despite everything that came after. I haven't decided yet. Maria thinks I should, says holding grudges doesn't bring back the dead or undo the past, says Rashid paid his debt, and Amira deserves to have her father back. Part of me agrees. The man saved my life 6 times. He turned himself in. He cooperated fully with authorities and helped stop an attack that would have taken American lives. He's done everything asked of him. But another part of me thinks about the Marines who didn't come home. Not from my unit, we were lucky, but from other units, other patrols, other missions that might have been compromised by interpreters like Rashid. Men who'd been walking between 2 worlds, trying to protect everyone and ending up protecting no one. How many Americans went home because of the information Rashid withheld from the Taliban? How many Afghans survived because he warned us away from populated areas? And how many people on both sides didn't make it because he was playing both sides at all? There's no way to know. No spreadsheet that calculates the net good or harm of a man like Rashid Armadi. Just the messy, complicated reality of someone trying to survive in a situation designed to destroy him. Finally, last week, I made my decision. I'm writing the letter. Not because I think what Rashid did was right, not because I forgive him exactly, but because I understand him, and because his daughter deserves to have her father back, just like my daughter deserves to have hers. In the letter, I'm telling the truth, all of it, that Rashid saved my life 6 times, that he did it while working for the enemy, that his motives were complex and his choices were impossible, that he walked a line between 2 worlds and somehow managed to minimize casualties on both sides, that when it mattered most, when he was asked to do real harm, he chose prison instead. I'm telling them that war is complicated, that the people caught in the middle of it, the interpreters and civilians and local nationals who have to navigate between occupying forces and insurgencies and tribal loyalties, those people don't get the luxury of simple choices. They get survival. They get compromise. They get the terrible calculus of which betrayal will cost the fewest lives. And I'm telling them that Rashid Armadi, for all his faults and crimes and deceptions, was trying to save lives, including mine. And that has to count for something. Before I seal the letter and mail it to his attorney, I write one more paragraph. This one's personal, not for the parole board, but for Rashid. His attorney will make sure he sees it. You asked me once if I understood why you stayed. I didn't then. I do now.
You stayed because leaving would have meant abandoning the people who needed you, your daughter, your nephew and niece, even us, the Americans who thought we were saving you when maybe you were saving us. I can't say whether what you did was right or wrong, but I can say you were brave. And I can say I'm glad Amira made it out. She's brilliant. She's going to change the world. That's your real legacy. Not the secrets or the lies or the compromises. Just her. And she's enough.
I learned something from Rashid Ahmadi that they don't teach you in infantry school or at officer candidate training. I learned that enemy and ally aren't always clear categories. That sometimes the person trying hardest to keep you alive is the same person putting you in danger. That survival in war means compromises that destroy you even as they save the people you love. I learned that there are no clean endings, no moment where everything makes sense and the good guys win and the bad guys lose and you get to go home and forget about it. Just people trying their best in impossible situations, making choices that will haunt them forever, hoping that when it's over, the people they love will survive. Rashid kept me alive for a year in Helmand province. He kept his daughter alive for 7 years in Taliban captivity. He kept himself alive long enough to see her freed. And now he's in a cell in Virginia, sleeping better than he ever did when he was free, because at least now he doesn't have to lie anymore. That's the story. That's the truth. 6 times he saved my life while working for the people trying to end it, and I still don't know if I should hate him for the betrayal or thank him for the gift of coming home. Maybe I should do both. Maybe that's the only honest response to a man who was both traitor and hero, enemy and friend, liar and the only person telling me the truth that mattered. Some things you can't simplify. Some people you can't categorize. Some wars don't end when you come home. They just change shape, become questions instead of firefights, haunt your quiet moments instead of your patrols. Rashid taught me that. He taught me that the hardest battles aren't the ones where you know who to shoot. They're the ones where everyone's trying to survive, and there are no good choices, and you have to live with the consequences forever. And maybe that's the real cost of war. Not the ones who don't come home, but the ones who do, carrying stories like this, trying to explain to their daughters why the world is more complicated than they want it to be, why the man who saved their father's life was also the man who endangered it, why justice and mercy and truth and loyalty can all exist in the same impossible moment and still leave you with no clear answers. I'm mailing the letter tomorrow. Rashid's parole hearing is in 3 months. I don't know if my statement will make a difference, but I owe him that much. For 6 times he kept me breathing. For the daughter who made it out. For the impossible choices he made in the dark when no one was watching, and both sides wanted him torn apart. He saved my life 6 times, and I'm still trying to figure out what that means.